Tyler with Workhorse here, and we've got a great guest with us, Kevin from Chromaline.
That's where I'm from.
Okay, so we have a few minutes with Kevin, and we're going to take a little bit of time here and talk about some darkroom basics, some darkroom
Perfect
101s,
Yeah.
chemicals.
I mean, the thing
Okay.
that probably gets looked over the most, and like especially startup print shops, right? Is you're focused on production, you're focused on getting the shirts out the door. As long as you can make a screen and it makes an image, that's fine, right? But there's a lot more to it, isn't there?
Well, yeah. I mean, if you think about it, it's called screen printing for a reason. The screen is important, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Right.
Makes
And
sense.
you're right. It does get looked over so often. And if there's problems on press, most likely it's because of the step before. It doesn't necessarily mean that your problems are printing on press. Most likely it's a screen problem that goes back to how it was coated, how it was exposed, the equipment that you're using, the films that you're using, everything that's involved with that obviously plays into it. So there's so many different variables in screen printing, right?
What do you think like the top three, or the major problems you see the most in all the print shops you go into in the darkrooms?
Number one, I would say exposure times.
Okay.
I would say most people are underexposing their screens.
Okay.
They underexpose their screens because they want to get more details out of it. They want to get finer details, but that isn't really the way to get those finer details.
What is underexposing? How do we know if something's underexposed or not?
Underexposed is going to lead back to pinholes. It's going to lead back to just breakdown on press. If you see on the edges of the squeegee, it's going to be wearing away, breaking down, whereas if it's properly exposed, that screen should hold up for thousands of impressions.
Hardened. Yeah.
First thing you brought up, underexposed. I'm guilty of this too, and you hit it on to capture detail.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've probably said it myself before. I've heard it said around, you go in a little light on the exposure time
Sure.
to try to capture detail.
Right.
And false.
Yeah,
Fake news.
you're fake news. You're fixing
Fake news.
Yeah.
fixing one thing and creating another problem by doing that, right?
Yep.
So exposure times are a balance of finding that proper resolution and finding that proper hardness. It's a balance of the two, right?
Yep.
So that's why with our exposure calculator, we actually will use resolution as well as a hardening point to find what that exposure time is. There's other ways where you have like the 21-step Stouffer scale and everything. That's just finding the hardening point of the emulsion,
Yeah.
whereas our other exposure calculator finds that hardening point as well as factors in that resolution as well. So, get with your emulsion manufacturer. Obviously, I think Chromaline, I think we're a good resource,
Yeah.
but I do think just go to whoever's making your products and find out, what are the ins and outs of this particular product that I'm using. That's one of the biggest things. For sure.
What about other things that matter in the darkroom, like temperature or humidity or the environment, or talk about that?
Yep, environmental factors are a huge thing when we're talking about screen rooms. Number one, make sure that your screen room is light safe, right?
What's that mean?
Light safe means that you've got the yellow UV safe covers over your lights. I've seen so many people talking online that, you don't necessarily have to have light safe conditions in your screen room, but if you don't, you're using a light sensitive product and it can pre-expose your screen. So that's
You heard it
gonna
here first. You heard it here first.
It's going to
And
start
last.
to expose that top layer of your emulsion.
Yeah.
So when you go to develop your screen, you're washing out your screen. You're going to have to blast through kind of a skimmed over layer of emulsion. People think now my screen's overexposed when it could just be
Oh, yeah.
pre-exposed.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
Also, other factors, we talk about temperature, we talk about humidity. So the ideal screen room, I'm
Yeah.
looking between like 60 and 80 degrees Fahrenheit
Okay.
and 30 and 40% humidity,
Okay.
with my target being 30% humidity.
And what's the target temperature? Do you have one? Like if you had to pick one number, I know you said 60 to 80, but
If
70?
you are comfortable, your screens are comfortable.
There you go.
Right?
Yeah.
That's the easiest way to say it. Like
love that.
if you're hot and sticky, your screens are hot and sticky, right?
Okay.
But if you're comfortable in there, your screens are going to be what they need to be. That's the easiest way I can say it, right?
Yeah. Love that.
Um,
What happens if you have too high of humidity in your room, or if you have too low of humidity? What are those consequences?
Yeah, so different emulsions are going to be affected differently. If you're using a dual cure emulsion that you're actually adding in the sensitizer, the diazobase, those emulsions will actually expose slower with more humidity in the air.
Okay.
When it's when it's drier, those will actually expose faster, and vice versa for pure photopolymers. Pure photopolymers will actually expose faster with more humidity in the air, and will expose slower when it's dry.
If you were to if you were to have a magic bullet for the startup screen printer or someone who's just figuring out their darkroom, like what, knowing that it's probably films, exposure unit, emulsion, and room, like what, if you just could name some specifics that people, because a lot of people don't know, they just go get emulsion or they go to the distributor. Like I think we started with capillary films.
That's a great place to start, right?
Okay.
That's a great place to start, because I'll tell you, coating screens is an art form.
Sure.
If you're hand coating screens, I've been hand coating screens for 20 plus years. I'm pretty good at it, but I am nowhere near as consistent as an automated coder is, right?
Yep.
Somebody just getting into it, I can guarantee you, if I were to measure each one of those screens, they're not going to be consistent.
Yeah.
So something like capillary film, we've done the coating for you.
Yeah.
Super easy, right? I can teach anybody to coat screens with capillary film. They'll be the same, they'll be consistent from screen to screen to screen.
Yep.
After teaching you 5 minutes,
Yep.
right? Now your screens are consistent from screen to screen. Now your exposures can stay consistent. Because if you're hand coating screens, some are thicker and some are thinner, those screens need a different exposure time.
Right.
Which is impossible. Now you're trying to chase a moving target, which is difficult, right? Impossible. And keep in mind, we build in exposure latitude to all of our products. Some are going to be more forgiving than others, so the slower exposing an emulsion is, the more forgiving that product is.
That makes sense.
So like if you're using a dual cure emulsion or a diazo-based emulsion, slower exposing means that it's going to be super forgiving. Something that's really fast exposing, you're going to be looking
right or wrong.
You got to be right on target with your exposure time. So now, a little bit thicker, a little bit thinner of a stencil, you're trying to chase that target. Now you could be overexposed, underexposed with the same time going right down that line.
A lot of variables for sure. One thing I get
Absolutely.
asked at our location on a handful of times that I don't know is there a educate me a little bit on shelf life of emulsion.
Sure.
Like even if it's purchased unopened versus then opened and used a little bit, or a dual cure that you mix.
Yeah.
Is there a
So pure photopolymers have the longest shelf life.
okay?
Typically around a 2-year shelf life unopened.
Okay.
And even if they're opened and you put the cover back on and it's stored in the correct environment, again, not too hot, not too cold, not too humid, 2 years.
2 years. Okay.
Right?
Yep.
Dual cure emulsions, anywhere between 12 to 18 months unopened.
Okay.
But when you add the diazo, you're looking right around that 4-week window.
Okay.
So if you're not going through a bucket of emulsion in a month, then I would suggest looking at something like a pure photopolymer.
Okay.
But I mean, smaller shops tend not to go through a full gallon of emulsion in that 4-week window.
Right.
And those shops tend to be the ones that need to use something that's more forgiving.
Yeah.
They don't have the perfect screen room.
Right.
So in that case, maybe buy a quart of emulsion instead of a full gallon of emulsion if you can't get through that full gallon.
Yeah.
You know?
That's awesome.
Desensitize a quart at a time.
Cool. Any other pro tips?
I mean, talking about, just getting into everything and making good high quality screens, the films are important.
Okay.
I would say that is another thing that is a huge catch when people are just getting into it. They use something like vellum, laser film, which is basically just like a piece of office paper that you just ran through your printer.
Yeah.
Now, if you were to take a measurement on that paper, like the clear area versus the dark printed area, it's going to measure relatively the same on, in a densitometer. Right? You want to have those be as far apart as possible. So the clear is very clear, the dark's very dark.
Okay.
Very dark. If just getting into something that's like a small printer package using actual inkjet film, you're going to be able to expose your screens properly. You're going to be able to do good halftones right out of the gates.
That's awesome.
If you're that is one thing that I'll walk into a shop, like smaller shops that are still using vellum and everything like that. Even, hey, I've got large shops that still use vellum because it's cheap, right?
Sure.
But the screen problems that you have outweigh the cheapness of that of that vellum. That's a huge thing. I'll walk in and you'll actually see the square of where that vellum was on the screen, and I can see that what you can see that square, that's underexposed, right? Because you can't fully expose the screen with vellum. It's
I walked
impossible.
into a shop one time and I saw somebody trying to reuse a piece of vellum, literally scrubbing the ink that was printed off with the spray.
That's tough.
Perfect.
Wild,
Yeah.
wild, huh?
Yeah. Dude, just tell them get out of this industry, please.
Well, let's
Please.
put a,
We don't need that.
let's put a bow on the tips with like let's talk about important things during screen reclamation or stencil making. Like how do we treat if we get a brand new screen or a screen that's been used 10 times? What really matters as far as like shoring up our darkrooms?
Yeah, I mean, as far as like reclaim goes, getting that screen as clean as possible, bringing it back to that raw mesh, whereas the emulsion can adhere to that raw mesh, that's super important, right? If you've got reclaimed chemicals that are left on that screen before, those are oil-based products. You've got a water-based product, which is what emulsion is.
Yeah.
Oil and water don't mix,
Yeah.
except in a salad,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And that's
You're starting off on the wrong
words
foot right
words
out
of
the gate.
Mick Orr, the goat of screen printing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, water and oil don't mix except in a salad. So when you look at a screen and you see fish eyes, you see streaks, you see pinholes, a lot of times that's just your screens aren't being cleaned well enough. There's a lot of people that you've got all these chemicals out there and they claim this can do this and this together. There's a little bit of truth to that, but degreasing your screens as a final step will also always clean your screens much better. And getting the degreaser off your screen too, right?
I think that degreaser, that's something I've seen that is often an overlooked step, or something that it just
Super
seems
overlooked.
like, because you can make a screen without degreasing and you can be successful, but you know,
super overlooked.
super overlooked.
Yep.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you
Awesome. Yeah.
for
Absolutely.
the time.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Tell us where we can get a hold of you. Where can we find you? Where can we keep up with you? If we have questions and need help, where do we go?
Yeah, you can find me on the socials, Emulsion Guru, one word.
True story.
nice.
Emulsion Guru.
On YouTube and in the Instas. So yeah, Emulsion Guru. But yeah, we've got everything at Chromaline from that we can handle the small basic startup shops all the way up to the super advanced huge 50 auto shops that I work with as well.
Yep.
So wherever you fall in that line of screen printing, we can help.
Gotcha.
Thank you, bro.
Kevin,
Yeah,
thanks,
thanks,
man.
guys.
Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thanks, Mal.
Appreciate it, bud.